The snow in the gods wood fell with a patience older than oaths. Every flake chose its branch, its stone, its threadbare patch of earth, and lay there as if it had known the place all along. Jon stood before the heart tree, the red leaves hanging limp and wet as bloodied cloth, and listened to the winter breathe. He tried to remember the sound of Ned Stark's voice when it held a secret. There had been no sound at all, only the stern quiet that said a thing could be true without being said. It had been easier to live in that quiet, easier to be only what Winterfell had taught him to be. A Stark without a name to match the halls. But the night pressed close, and the world was no longer made of easy things. Somewhere beyond the walls, dead men walked under a sky that had forgotten warmth, and a dragon with eyes of ice made the wind keen like a knife. The living would gather tomorrow in the great hall to plan their last stand. After that, there might be no more chances to speak. Sam had come to him with slush on his boots and papers in his trembling hands, with a look as if truth were a weight and he'd found himself somehow strong enough to carry it. Bran had not walked so much as arrived, as if thought had carried him through the snow faster than feet would have. Together they had made the world line up in a way that hurt. He felt rather than heard the soft tread behind him. Ghost pressed a white muzzle against Jon's black-gloved hand. The direwolf's breath fogged in the cold, warm where it touched. Jon scratched between the ears, the same old place he had always favored, and the wolf closed his eyes for a heartbeat and leaned his weight into it. "Do you remember the crypts, boy?" Jon murmured. How it felt to belong to stone. Ghost's ears twitched. The gods would seem to hold its breath. The last time he had stood here, the gods had listened to the prayers of a bastard. Now they would listen to the decision of a man who was not a bastard at all. "I have to tell them," Jon said to the stillness. "Not all, but some. Enough." He thought of Daenerys's eyes, the way they burned with purpose, the way they softened when they found him. He thought of the lords of the north, of Sansa's careful cunning and Arya's sharp smile, of Bran's wide-eyed knowing. He thought of the dead at the castle's edge, and of a truth that might cut his people's trust as cleanly as Valyrian steel. "I have to tell them," he repeated, because some truths grew stronger when spoken aloud. The words hung like frost until dawn. At first light the kitchens sent the breath of bread down the corridors, and hammer blows shivered through the stones as if the keep were a drum. Everywhere men sharpened, bound, tightened, counted, bundled, stacked, and swore. War did not move forward by meaning alone. It crawled on hands and knees through all the necessary things. Jon crossed the yard with Ghost pacing at his heel and took the steps 2 at a time to the hall. They were assembled sooner than he expected. The hall burned with torchlight and the talk of 100 throats. Armor muttered against armor. Furs shed crystal beads that melted where they fell. The high table was a narrow lane through a loud town. Sansa sitting tall and grave, her hair braided with silver thread. Arya in the shadows, her eyes lamplight quick. Bran beneath a piled quilt, the carved wood of his chair a white root. Tyrion with ink-stained fingers. Varys as still as a winter pond. Davos with his palms spread on the table as if smoothing a map. Grey Worm lean and listening. Missandei with a hand around a cup never drunk. Tormund laughing too loudly. Gendry awkward at the edge of important people. Lyanna Mormont with her jaw set as if she would bite winter back into fall. Beside them all, Daenerys Targaryen, the mother of dragons, her face the calm surface of a fire. He had not planned words. It had never been his way to bring a speech like a sword to a fight. He cleared his throat and the hall stilled, as if the wind outside had pressed 2 hands to the thick wood of the doors. Even Ghost halted at the threshold and lifted his head. "We plan for tomorrow," he began. "We plan for living and for dying. I will follow the plan we make. But before we do, there is truth that belongs to all of you. It belongs to the North. It belongs to the armies under these banners. It belongs to our queen." Tyrion's gaze sharpened. Varys folded his hands. Sansa's eyes found Bran, and then Jon, with a movement so slight most would have missed it. Daenerys did not move at all. "Sam," Jon said. Sam's mouth opened and shut. His hands found the parchment tied with a blunt strip of leather. "The Citadel keeps records of births and marriages. he said, his voice thin but sure. Clerks write them, and archmasters order the writing, and ink remembers even after men forget. He did not look at Daenerys, though she was looking at him, and when he said, I was with Maester Gilly when she read of an annulment performed by the High Septon in Dorne. He set aside the marriage of Prince Rhaegar Targaryen and Elia of Dorne. The same record says the prince wed another. He swallowed. He wed Lyanna Stark. No one breathed. Davos's fingers tightened against the wood. Tormund's grin fell away like a stone from a cliff. Sansa's lips parted and a single white fog left them, as if her body had forgotten to pretend the hall was warmer than outside. Arya's eyes went very slow and very still. Bran's voice, when it came, was a thread pulled taut. He called the child Aegon. I watched him. His stare was not for the hall but for snow that had fallen in another season. I watched him place a hand on Lyanna's brow. She said, Promise me. Ned Stark carried the child north. He told the world the boy was his. Bran's eyes returned to Jon, and in them there was a sorrow older than either of them could bear alone. He told no one to keep the boy safe. Daenerys's hand tightened on the arm of her chair. One of her rings tapped once. Tyrion shut his eyes for the space of a blink as if tasting a bitter afterthought. Varys tilted his head like a raven listening to a dead branch creak. I was that boy, Jon said. The hall did not answer. He stood in the space left by their silence and felt every inch of it like raw skin in cold air. My father by blood was Rhaegar Targaryen. My mother was Lyanna Stark. Ned Stark lied for me because the truth would have killed me. Gods! Davos's whisper was almost prayer. Lyanna Mormont rose, small and fierce. What does it mean? She demanded. Speak plain, my lord. It means I am not my lord, Jon said quietly. It means the name I was given at birth was a different name. It means, and here he looked at Daenerys, and it was like standing at the mouth of a cave and feeling both the chill and the warm throat of a dragon's breath. That if the world were just parchment and signatures, I would have a claim to the Iron Throne. A rustle, as if the hall were a creature shifting its great weight. Tormund was the first to find a voice large enough to bridge the chasm. He's our king, he bellowed, and somewhere a cup rattled against a plate. We named him for the North. We named a Stark, Lyanna Mormont shot back. Are you a Stark of Winterfell or a dragon from far south? Will you fly away when summer comes? I have a dragon's blood, Jon answered, and a wolf's bones. He was not sure any words could hold the two together, but he had to try. I took a knee to Daenerys because she brought armies and fire to fight a war for the living. Before I knew my name. Knowing it now doesn't make me less grateful, less bound, or less determined to fight beside her. Daenerys's eyes did not leave him. You knew this, she said softly. You chose to speak it. He swallowed. I won't have men die for a lie. I won't have the North made to believe it bent for a man it thought was born in this hall when I was not. If we're to ask sacrifices of them, they'll give them with their eyes open. Your eyes, too, Tyrion murmured. He turned slightly, not enough to make it formal, but enough to place himself between the queen and the room. The timing is inconvenient. The dead won't ask for convenient, Davos said. I've never known them to be polite. Varys's voice floated like winter mist. It is better to know where the ground is soft before you put a foot to it. Secrets have a way of breaking the ice beneath us. Sansa said nothing. Then, proof. It wasn't refusal. It was the North's way. Show me what keeps the snow out. Sam lifted the parchment. Bran's deep eyes did not waver. The weirwood beyond the walls seemed to watch with its red leaves. And finally Sansa nodded once, as if the last bead of water had fallen off her understanding and left the shape clear. Truth is cold, she said, but it burns when it must. You mean to keep your knee to her? Lyanna Mormont demanded, pointing at Daenerys as if accusing the storm itself. My knee stays bent, Jon said, and my sword stays in the fight we all came north to fight. If anyone here thinks to test me, I'll meet them in the yard after we live through tomorrow. Daenerys stood. Her voice took on no extra weight and needed none. The realm can decide what it wishes after the dead have no more to demand. She looked at Jon, and something like a question and a warning moved in her face. I came to shatter a wheel, not to trade seats upon it while the wheel tramples us. We fight as one. The hall exhaled. Some nodded. Some did not. But there was a plan to make, and hunger, like death, did not wait for doubts to settle. Jon drew breath as if surfacing from a cold lake and forced his feet to move as Davos swept maps onto the table and Tyrion's quill scratched its tireless tracks and Grey Worm cleared his throat to translate movement into lines of men and steel. The cavalry will not charge, Jon said. Came out too sharp and he softened it. Not into blind snow at an enemy we can't count. Their strength is motion. We keep them moving here. He tapped the angled rides behind the trenches, a pocket shaped by earthworks Gendry's men had labored to raise. If the dead cross, the Dothraki hit the flanks where the fire breaks the numbers. They don't vanish into the dark. No one vanishes into the dark. Tormund frowned. What if the dead don't cross at all? They pile up and make a bridge. Then we make the bridge burn, Davos said. We light the trenches early, not as a last gasp. We lay oil-soaked straw and dragonglass stakes in a second ring closer to the keep. The living retreat by signal, not by panic. And for the crypts. The crypts are not safe, Jon cut in. He can raise any dead in these walls. He did not say your father to Sansa. He watched her swallow the memory anyway. We don't pack children and old men in there and think ourselves clever. We station armed guards at the doors with dragonglass. We bring lanterns and torches. We keep the bodies closest to the doors behind bars of iron. If the dead rise, the first thing they'll find is hot steel, not easy flesh. Tyrion's pen paused. I should be above, he said. My head is better above ground than under it. You'll command the reserves in the inner yard, Sansa said before Jon could speak. You'll count men, move them where they're needed, and you'll not drink while you do it. Tyrion gave her a small, pained nod of respect. Not even I relish wine in a blizzard of bones. Brienne leaned over the table, a gauntlet finger placing itself quietly near the god's wood drawn on parchment. He wants the three-eyed raven, she said. He wants me. Bran agreed, a bare statement of a barer fact. You cannot make him want differently. You can make him come on terms not his own, Arya said. She stood with that careless balance that made other fighters look clumsy. Give him away and he will choose it. He isn't human. He's a hunter. He follows paths that smell like prey. Then we lash scent to this path, Davos said. We place the Ironborn here in the god's wood with Theon on the bow, with ravens diving where we want his eyes looking. We keep the dragons in the air until it is time to burn a path he can't resist. Viserion, Daenerys said. The word fell between them with a private grief only she could weigh. He will be in the sky, she added for the room. His fire is blue, his breath colder than wind. If he comes for the walls, Drogon will meet him. Rhaegal will guard the godswood, Jon said, and Daenerys's gaze shifted to him. It would be a shared sky, then a shock of air around them both, two beats of wings that might match or crash. I don't chase the Night King into the storm. He draws chase to scatter. We keep high until we see him turn toward Bran. And if the storm hides him the whole night? Tyrion asked. Then we survive the night, Davos said simply. We don't win it. Not until we can see to kill him. Melisandre came as she had before. No presence, and then presence all at once. Flame cupped in her hands against the cold. Eyes turned, and old as they were, they still turned for a woman who had carried impossible fire into impossible places. Men and women are not writings to be corrected, she said, addressing no one and everyone. But sometimes even stubborn ink can be persuaded to smudge. Her gaze found Arya with a small, knowing nod. It slid across Davos like an apology she did not ask permission to give. It held Jon's eyes until he felt the heat of an old prophecy like a burn he had almost forgotten was there. You, Davos said, will light the trenches. I will light what has always been waiting to burn, she answered. You will hold. You will remember that gods are not ladders to be climbed. The night does not love any of us, but it prefers its own. When the council broke, the hall emptied like a lung. Jon stepped out into a yard blue with early dusk. The air tasted clean as a new blade. He did not have to turn to know she had followed. Your truth is a sword with two edges, Daenerys said behind him. Her voice bent with the wind, then straightened again. It cuts the dead from our lies. It cuts my claim at the root. He faced her. Ghost waited and then chose to go, ghosting into the dark where he could watch without choosing a side. My claim is ink, Jon said. Yours is fire. I told them what I am because I owe them that. I did not tell them what to choose. I won't tell them that. Not yet. You are asking them to choose you by pretending not to ask. I'm asking them to live through tomorrow. He took a step closer and saw the tiny flecks of snow caught in her eyelashes. Small pale clings on black, like stars in a night that had decided to rest on her face. Take it from me if you want it. Use both dragons. Break me in front of them. Or trust me and let the dead take first claim on our tempers. Her mouth twisted, then smoothed. You would never be still under someone who asked that of you. I bent the knee, he said. I stayed bent even when I learned what I learned. That's not stillness. That's choosing. He hesitated. Marry me after the war. The words leapt out and were steam. They vanished into the cold, but their heat touched skin. Or don't. But think on it. It would end what doubt starts. The North is more likely to accept a queen who is bound to a Stark. The South is more likely to accept a king who is bound to a Targaryen. There would be questions. He grimaced. More than questions. But our people have lived with stranger things than marriages. Her eyes softened and then hardened, as if kindness were a tide that had learned the reef beyond it very well. I will not marry a man who can take what I have sworn to win. I will marry an ally, if I marry at all. You have that ally now, he said. You have me. I have you, she repeated. And the words were not a promise this time, merely a map. After tomorrow, we will see how much of you is left. Night cracked over Winterfell, and the world became a thing measured by torches and screaming. Jon stood with his feet in stirrups slick with melt and soot, Regal's breath blasting the snow from the top of the gatehouse, and watched the lines of dead appear beyond the firelight like a sketch filling in itself. More and more and more until counting stopped mattering. A horn sounded below. He lifted his arm and the horn sounded again. Don't move. Wait. On the field, the Dothraki horses stamped and tossed, their riders' rocks flashing with oil. The ghost of a former plan whispered. A foolish, galloping ghost. He had killed it by daylight. The living this night would keep their feet. A dark seam cut across the snow. Melisandre walking the trench. The wind fought her, fought the words she spoke. On the fourth try, the trench leapt into light as if insulted by delay. Fire roared up and up, a bright ring telling the cold where it must stop. The dead did not know insult. They came on and threw themselves on flame where a man might hesitate, and the fire made a voice of itself. Arrows sang from the walls, struck, and vanished. Dragonglass shattered bones like winter wood. For a time the fire held. Then bodies made bridges, black shapes slumping into the flame until the flame had no room for air. It dimmed, it faltered. The first of the dead fell with a sound like a sack of rocks into a ditch and then scrambled out as fire licked at legs that did not feel. Now, Davos's messenger cried. The horn sounded. The first reserve shifted as if a great animal had slept and woken. Dothraki rode as shadows ride. Not where you looked, but where you looked next. They cut the flanks of dead crossing at the thinnest bridges and melted back at the signal. Unsullied lines advanced, spears a dark forest taking one step together, 2 steps together, 3. Grey Worm's command was a knife that cut panic away. Jon kicked heels to ribs and felt Regal's muscles gather. The dragon surged, and the sky swallowed them. Wind became cold cloth slapped across his face. He rose into cloud and into blindness. On instinct alone he banked hard and lifted, blasting snow with green fire to peel the dead off the second ring of stakes. He did not look for Drogon. He felt him, a pulse in the storm. Somewhere Viserion screamed, and the sound shattered some part of memory that had hoped not to hear it again. On the wall, Sansa watched the world in fragments. This curtain of snow pulled aside to reveal fighting at the east gate. That one pulled aside to show men slipping and the ground turning treacherous for friend and foe alike. She sent runners down stairways slick with melt and ash to fetch up boxes of dragonglass and ropes and oilskins. She forced her gaze toward the inner yard when it wanted to stay with the line below, because Tyrion needed numbers to move. "You!" She pointed to 3 boys who had turned to men the moment the horn sounded. "To the west parapet." "You," she stopped. Arya stood beside her without breath. "What are you doing up here?" "Learning," Arya said, and shut her eyes for a moment. When they opened, they were darker. "Bran is waiting." "Not yet," Sansa said. She wanted to take Arya's hand and put it in her pocket like a jewel where it would be safe. Instead, she tightened the cord around her cloak. "Keep moving. If you stop, you'll start listening to them." In the Godswood, Theon notched and loosed, and with each arrow he hummed a note under his breath without meaning to. A sound from the Iron Islands that his body remembered even if he wished it had forgotten. The Ironborn at his back were not his father's men. They were men who had survived their fathers and chosen this. Bran sat beneath the heart tree and stared as if he could see spring coming down from the far north like an army of green leaves. The first of the dead found the roots and tried to climb. Theon's arrow pinned it through the eye to wood that had felt 100 killings and would feel 100 more. In the crypts, Tyrion stood with one hand on the rough stone and the other on a torch and told himself there would be enough time to be clever later. Missandei watched the children with the calm of a woman who knew she could not stop storms but could be a wall others crashed against. Sansa's small folk, seeing a woman whose hair looked like winter sunlight, stood a little straighter for it. When the first sound came from the deeper tunnels, a shifting, then a tinkle like ice breaking, then another, Tyrion's knuckles went white around the torch. "Guards," he said. "To the doors." The unsullied sergeant there nodded once, as if he had been waiting for the order all his life. Melisandre met Sandor Clegane in a corridor lit by the sparse rhythm of torches. "Fear," she said, "has fast feet but poor aim." "I know fire," the hound said hoarsely. "It knows me." He wiped a shaking hand across his mouth, left a smear of ash. "It'll go for me first." "Then let it," she said. "Let it run past and catch a man too slow to move." She placed a hand on his chest. "You are not slow, dog. You were born to bite. There is a girl who will jump because you keep your feet. Do not forget." He made a noise that might have been a laugh if it had any joy left in it, and pushed past her toward the stairs. Drogon came out of the storm like a piece of night that had decided to hunt. His fire drove a path through bodies that did not even know enough to scream. Daenerys leaned into the curve of his neck as if into a lover's shoulder. She saw through the storm when fire made the storm blink. She counted breaths between gusts. She held. She was not a girl in a wedding tent. She was a woman with armies below her and an enemy who did not bend and a man on the back of another dragon whose words had put fire beneath her feet. Their Viserion, a shattered thing with holes where glory used to live. Blue breath tore a tower's top from itself and flung it into darkness. Regal climbed, a green flare in the snow like moss suddenly remembering how to live. Jon pulled, Regal answered, and they cut across Viserion's path. The dragons struck, each feeling the other in claw and spine. Snow exploded into ice shards. Regal's roar raked Jon's bones from the inside. He tasted blood, and the iron of it told him he could still do what needed doing. They broke, circled, and climbed again. Through a window in the storm Jon saw the Godswood. Scattered torchlight in a pale bowl, shapes moving like men in a bad dream. He could not see the Night King, but he could feel him the way a man feels winter coming through doors, indifferent to wood and iron. Bran's eyes rolled white. There was a soft rustle as if leaves turned the page of a book altogether. Ravens rose. 1,000 black dots became a single great eye in the sky. Somewhere beneath those wings, the Night King turned his head. "Now," Jon said, though no one could hear him, Though the word died in the mouth of the storm, he kicked and regal dove. Arya moved through chaos as if it had been choreographed for her. A dead giant tore down a section of palisade and leaned into the hole it had made, one milky eye rolling in a skull cratered by old battles. Lyanna Mormont charged it like a thrown knife. Arya turned aside to let the girl pass, because some hits belonged to those who believed in them the most. She saw Lyanna sink steel into an eye and vanish in the same motion. She saw a light go out with a terrible, stubborn beauty. She did not look away. She moved on. Below her feet blood turned the packed snow into paste. She never slipped. She saw Theon's arm falter for the first time. She saw Bran watch with calm that was not cruel. She saw the spaces between the dead, which was all there ever was to see that mattered. The Night King came into the Godswood as if the trees were merely waiting for him to be beautiful. His crown. A frost made no sound. The air around him remembered warmth and apologized without hope. The White Walkers moved around him like a language the living could not hear. Theon emptied his last quiver, drew a broken spear like a man draws breath, and ran. He ran at a god who wasn't one and at fate that was only a story men whisper to make courage bearable. When he fell, the snow was oddly clean where he landed, and the last sound he made was relief. Jon felt the Night King like a toothache in the world. He slammed through the last of the storm and dropped Regal so close to the ground that he felt the treetops slap at his boots. He leapt, hit the snow hard, stumbled, and was up again, Longclaw a straight thing in a bent world. The White Walkers stepped to meet him. His breath came in knives. He cut one and it shattered like an icicle popped in sun. A second came at him, blade bright, and he parried and felt the numb shock of it up his arm. Then another and another. It was not a contest. It was a measure of time. Daenerys saw the Night King in the Godswood and drove Drogon into a dive that made the world as small as the space between his jaws. Fire poured from the dragon's life into the clearing. It washed over blue eyes and blank faces and brittle armor. It hammered the heart tree until the bark steamed. When the flames stopped, the smoke thinned like a curtain being taken down. The Night King stood in the steam. He looked up and saw a queen who had traded safety for the chance to choose. He knocked an arrow of ice to a bow grown of winter and pulled back. Drogon banked with a twist that made muscle scream. The arrow missed by a breath and cracked a boulder as if crushing a cough. The Night King stepped into the space he had made by not burning. He moved toward Bran with a slowness that was not caution but the luxury of inevitability. Jon cut down the last White Walker between himself and that slow stride. He saw Theon lying in a cast-off grace. He saw Bran's face turned up to snowflakes that stuck to his lashes and did not melt. He saw the Night King step once more, and raise his hand. A wind went through the Godswood but did not bother the leaves. The dead rose where they fell and where they had long fallen. In the crypts the old kings reached for the living with fingers like roots, and iron smashed into skulls as unsullied held their line. On the ramparts a huddle of shattered men found themselves standing and remembered nothing at all except hunger. In the yard, an old woman's voice went silent as breath left and returned without permission. The world shivered as if a string strummed far below it. Jon sank to one knee in the snow. The weight of the dead was a thought pressed into his bones. He pushed up again. He could not reach the Night King in time. He watched, with a clarity so hideous it felt beautiful, as a story concluded itself in the only way a story of slow feet and a raised hand can. The hand did not fall. A shadow took shape where no shadow should be. It moved the way a deer moves when it knows it can leap or die and does not care which as long as it does not stop. The Night King turned his head. The shadow became a girl. Her blade flashed once, twice. A hand caught her by the throat. A mouth with no breath opened. A dagger fell from a right hand into a left. The blade's point found the exact part of the world where all its wrongness was woven together and slid home. The Night King fell apart quietly. The sound was like ice sighing under spring. All at once, the world remembered itself. Breath, heat, screams turned into laughter because they did not know what else to do. The dead did not stand anymore. They fell, grateful as crops will always be to gravity when the reaping is just. Daenerys pulled Drogon up hard. Jon dropped Longclaw into the snow without thinking and reached Bran in 3 strides. He stood over the boy as if he could be a wall. Arya was a small, shaking heat beside him, eyes larger than any there, and stains on her cheek that would not be wiped away. They were alive. That was the most insane thing of all. They were alive. At dawn the field smoked. The last thin flames licked at bodies stacked in ordered pyres. Sansa lit one. Theon's face was calm and unfamiliar, as if he had finally washed every mark from it. She moved to the next. Yora's head lay turned toward the sky he had loved because she loved it. Daenerys' hands did not shake until the second pyre, and then they was still again. Lyanna Mormont's form was so small under wood that it seemed indecent to ask wood to do that much, and yet it did. Davos spoke a few words in a voice that had learned how to make comfort from honesty. Tormund drank from a skin and wept without looking to see if anyone saw. Jon found Daenerys after, sitting on the low wall near the training yard, hands empty, the place where Rains had been a ghost against her palms. "We lived," he said, "because sometimes even kings of winter do not know how to begin." "Did we?" she asked. She looked at the pyres, and the smoke that went up like the last prayers of a season. "We will live again tomorrow," they will say, "but not all of us. Never all of us. The realm is good at making us pay twice," he said. "Once in blood, once in choice." She turned to him then. Her eyes had learned something last night. "They saw you," she said. "When the night wanted them to see nothing but itself, they saw you. They shouted your name. They shouted yours," he said. "They shouted mine the way men shout for fire when their fingers are freezing," she said. "They shouted yours the way they say the name of the place they are trying not to die far from." He didn't know if that was true. Perhaps he didn't want to know. "We still have Cersei. We still have Cersei," she echoed, with the weariness of a woman who names a storm and knows naming does not blunt wind. Word went south with the first outriders who still had horses with breath in them. The ravens went too. By the time the living took ship from White Harbor to Dragonstone, the capital had already learned every rumor the North had room to invent. The boy who was not a bastard, the queen who had burned death itself, the lords who had died, the ones who had not. Varys's little birds made nests in every eave. Tyrion read 10 letters for everyone he should have wasted his eyes upon and slept in the chair he bent over, sometimes with pen still in his hand. At Dragonstone the sea beat black stone the way grief beats the inside of a chest. Daenerys walked the old halls and felt the dragon bone of the island under her. She stood with Missandei where the sand curved like a palm and watched gray worm count men and armor and scars. Jon stood at the edge of a terrace and looked at a gray, flat line that had once been worlds for him and now looked like a moat around a room he could not decide to enter. Regal preened a ragged wing and made a soft noise in his chest that meant contentment so mild it could be mistaken for sadness. "We change our approach," Tyrion said, drawing a ship in dust on a table older than any map. "We know the capital will aim scorpions at the sky. We do not present sky to be aimed at. Let the fleet leave before the dragons," Davos said. "We swim the dragons in cloud, high and east, so the sun blinds men who look to find them. We land behind the city, not on it. We strangle the iron fleet between 2 hard things, sea and fire." "Your Grace," Varys said to Daenerys, "may we speak plainly about bells?" Daenerys's mouth thinned. "You may speak plainly about anything. If bells ring," Varys said, "I ask you to consider what it does to the realm to teach it they mean nothing." "They have meant nothing for a long time," she said. "Men in red keep ring them when the wrong people kneel. They ring and kings are made of coin. Why should their noise bind me more tightly than my oaths?" "Because you will be queen after," Varys said. "It is easier to build on stones that have not been burned smooth." Tyrion lifted his hands. "We can kill Cersei without killing her city. There is a path through this that is not soaked in children." Daenerys looked at Jon. He had thought out his answer every night on a dragonstone bed that smelled of salt and ancient fire. He gave it now. "We don't kill people to warn the future about the past." She stared at him, and there was an ache there that was not simple. And if she does not surrender, then we end her, not them. She did not promise, but she did not refuse. The fleet sailed in gray dawn, black sails bent to wind. Gendry stood on a deck swearing at lines as if they were stubborn iron, and Arya laughed at him without sound from the shadow of a stair. On the water the Iron Fleet waited, their prows crouched like ambush cats. But when the black specks rose from the clouds behind them instead of in front, their captains shouted, and the shouting did not change how long it takes for men to crank a scorpion. Drogon came down like falling night. Rhaegal tore the first ship's mast loose as if yanking a splinter from a hand. Fire rolled over decks, climbed ropes that had been softened by salt and time, and then leaped ship to ship with the greedy joy of a contagion. Euron Greyjoy's smile never left his face as he screamed orders. It was not a brave smile. It was the smile of a man who had learned long ago that if he moved fast enough, fear could not catch him. He swung a scorpion toward a green blur and fired. The bolt skimmed Rhaegal's wing and snapped two of the patched struts. Jon felt the shock in his thighs and hauled hard. Rhaegal banked with a whine of pain, righted, and seared the scorpion into slag. Daenerys drove Drogon across the flagship's deck so low sailors flung themselves overboard into fire. When the smoke opened its eye again, the Iron Fleet was a memory scratching at the water. Those who could not swim called to gods who had never answered anyone. Cersei Lannister watched it from a high window with a cup of wine that tasted of a year when grapes had not known frost. She watched the smoke rise, and then found the part of herself that could watch and not blink, and wrapped it around her like a cloak. Qyburn's whisper crawled around her ears. "A force is only a force if it has direction," he said. "They have force. We have walls. We have men who are paid to stand on them. We have the knowledge that people like her will make themselves into what we need them to be." "What is that?" she asked, not because she didn't know, but because she wanted to hear him say it. "A monster," he said. "If we are very, very lucky." The armies of the living reached the city in 8 days. They camped as close as they dared to the walls and as far away as pride would allow. The heat pressed down like a hand. Winterfell men peeled furs from shoulders and squinted at sun as if it had forgotten them on purpose. Behind them, the north had begun to thaw, and rivers carried the last mess of dead whales that had been armies. Ahead of them, the Red Keep hunched like a patient illness. Jon went alone to where Sansa's letter had told him to go. A small tent with a fresh-painted direwolf and a smaller banner with the rune of the Vale. The Lord's declarant, who had once followed Littlefinger's checkered steps without seeing the board, now stood wary of any game. Sansa met him with a map that was not of roads but of people. "Yon Royce," she said, "will follow as long as no one tries to make ground of the Vale. The Manderleys will keep their promises until the harvest looks thin. The Glover men come late and leave early." She touched his wrist, as if asking for permission to say the thing that might scald. "The North will accept her only if you make it impossible for them not to. Or if you refuse what they want to put on your head." "I won't be king," he said. "You are a king," she said. "That's the part no one tells why. Ooh, it's not a chair. It's a bruise you can't find the cause of. It hurts even when you sit down. Would you be queen?" "In the North," she said. "If you think they should have a queen." He looked at her for a long moment, and the first real smile of days found his face. "I think the North knows what it wants more than I ever will. It always has." At the city walls, Tyrion walked alone in a place where men could see him very clearly and very easily kill him if they chose. He shouted up, and for a time the only answer he received was the sound of a crossbow being cranked and not fired. Then Qyburn appeared, his mouth full of polite no. "She will not surrender," Qyburn said. "I will say the word surrender again, in case saying it makes any difference. Surrender. It makes no difference. Tell her," Tyrion called. "The bells. The bells will save her people." Qyburn lifted a hand as if feeling rain that was not there. "She has no people," he said. "She has pieces on a board and a stubborn, beautiful thing in her head that says she must move them. You of all people should understand her." "I do," Tyrion said. That's why I know how this ends if she does not stop it." They waited. The drums of death in a city are drums made by food and water being counted and failing to be counted. Jon walked the camp as if it were a long lane in Winterfell that had forgotten its own name. He stopped at the tent where Arya's shadow was longest and spoke little. He walked to the line of unsullied sharpening blades and nodded to Grey Worm and saw in the man's eyes the skin over a wound that had not been allowed to scab. He stood with Gendry and watched him look at the wall the way a smith looks at a stubborn bar, and didn't tell him any lie about bars wanting to bend. He found Daenerys at the edge of the world and stood with her while the sun slid down behind the city and made it look, for a fraction of a foolish second, like a thing worth saving. "If she doesn't surrender," Jon said, "we take the Red Keep. We leave the houses." Daenerys looked at the Red Keep as if it had once told her a bedtime story. "I want to burn it," she said. "Then burn it," he said, surprising himself. "But not the street that leads to it." She turned. "And if the street stands in the way, find another street." The morning came thin. A wind from the south carried the smell of thousands crammed into squares trying to decide whether to pray. The lines formed, unsullied in their perfection, Northmen in their disarray that was also its own kind of perfection, Dothraki restless as fire under oil. Davos sent runners to remind men what signals meant. Tyrion stood with a look that said he had run out of cleverness and would make do with hope. Daenerys mounted. Jon mounted. The dragons rose. They circled high, so high the scorpions on the walls looked like children's toys. Daenerys did what she had done on the water. She used sun like a shield. She used cloud like a cloak. She used her own breath to make patience. She waited until the first stones went over before she sent fire down. It raked along the top of the wall and made archers forget their fingers. The gates buckled with heat. Unsullied moved in wedges into the places flame had thinned. Northmen howled. The city yielded the way cities yield. Not with clean lines, but with patches, with gates that stuck and then gave, with men who dropped swords and sank to their knees where they stood because their knees were the only parts of them that still knew how to bend. The bells did ring. They rang because people inside the tower had hands, and those hands found ropes, and the ropes answered because bells are stupid and obedient like that. The sound traveled along the river and into the camp and up into the sky. Drogon's wings cut it into ragged pieces, but it reached Daenerys anyway. She heard it and closed her eyes for a moment, as if someone had put a cool cloth to her brow. Then she dived, not to the streets, but to the keep. Cersei stood in her high window and watched a dragon fly straight at her home. She did not scream. Qyburn did, internally. He grabbed her arm with a pressure that would leave marks on any flesh with the decency to bruise and pulled her away from the window. "We must go," he said. "We must go now." "I have always hated basements," she said. They went anyway. They went down the long stair where King's footsteps had worn grooves like polished bones. The Hound met the mountain on a landing lit like a stage that had waited years for the right performance. Arya slid into the keep the way a whisper slides into a sleeping mouth and found her path with the certainty of a needle finding the place it had to go. Jaime did not come. There was no Jaime to come. The tides of earlier days had left him stranded somewhere else. Drogon's fire hit the Red Keep where it was oldest and proudest. Stones split. Statues leaned with the surprise of their own falling. Arya ran through cloud and ash until she was a shadow in a black world. She found Qyburn on the stairs and sank a blade into the hollow beneath his shoulder and left him to bleed with a look of surprise on his face, as if he had been sure he was the sort of man who lived through everything. She found the queen with dust in her hair and no more crown. Cersei lifted her chin. "Is there anyone left who deserves a speech?" she asked. "No," Arya said, and moved. The blade that had undone a king of winter undid a queen of lions. Cersei fell without beauty, because death is not beautiful, even when it comes to the beautiful. The walls shuddered as if they, too, exhaled. Arya wiped her blade and walked out into the open air and into a city that had survived enough for a lifetime. After, there was no throne. The room that had kept it had become a sky courtyard, with birds trying it cautiously as if it were a place they had been forbidden too long. Daenerys stood in its ruins and did not step onto a melted puddle where the iron had been. Jon found her there, with soot in the bend of her fingers. "It's gone," she said. "It was always just a chair," he said. "It was always every chair in every room," she said. And for the first time he heard how tired she was. Bone-tired, blood-tired, tired in the part of a person that does not know how to rest. "I am so tired of sitting." "Stand then," he said softly. "Stand somewhere new." They stood in the dragon pit among lords who were not sure what sort of world they would go home to. They were a smaller circle than legends had promised. Sansa with Winterfell braided into her hair and Arya at her shoulder. Jon Royce with a piece of the veil in the set of his back. Gendry in a lord's clothes that did not yet know how to fit him. Davos, who had no lordship and no wish for one. Tyrion, wearing his failures like medals. Varys, lighter than air and twice as hard to hold. Brienne with a blade that had earned all of its honor. Grey Worm standing as if he still heard drums that had been silence for days. A raven landed on a broken stone and listened. No one shooed it away. Even birds had earned a hearing. "We can fight over a crown that has no head," Tyrion said. "We can rebuild a chair. We can do what we have always done until the wheel we always speak of breaks us once more. Or we can try something else." Sansa lifted her eyes to Jon. He shook his head almost imperceptibly. He did not want the thing the air would press upon him if he let it. She drew breath and spoke with a north wind behind her words. "The North remembers what it is. We were kings once. We can be that again." Grey Worm's gaze flickered. "You will separate. Leave the rest in chains they have never asked to wear. Free people choose their own borders," Sansa said. "We bled for ours." Daenerys watched them with an expression so careful it was almost not an expression at all. "What you want is not what they want," she said to Jon. "They want you to want what they want." "I want peace," he said. "I want not to lie to anyone anymore." Gendry cleared his throat. "I'll swear to her," he said, jerking his chin at Daenerys. "Storm's End hasn't had a steady hand in years. I was born from a king who had nothing steady about him. I have a hammer. I can make something. But I'll swear, if she doesn't tell me to hit the people who pay my smiths." "House Baratheon," Daenerys said slowly, tasting it as if it were a fruit she had never thought to pick. "Of Storm's End." He reddened, and Arya looked briefly, involuntarily pleased. Jon Royce spoke for the Vale. "We want a queen who doesn't ask our sons to forget their hills," he said. "We want roads that bring our grain to market and do not bring us fire without asking." Tyrion looked from one to the other and saw perhaps for the first time a picture that was not of a single chair. "Select a queen," he said. "Select a king in the north. Select wardens who are not chained to Father's sins. Make a council that rules more than it orders. Make it possible, for once, that a child might inherit something other than a debt." Varys's mouth moved. "You propose an election." "I propose remembering that people can choose," Tyrion said. "Rocks cannot. Men can." Grey Worm's jaw worked. "My people do not vote. They receive orders. Some of them are tired of it," Missandei said. She stood a half-step behind her commander and a half-step to his side, where the voice can slip in without the spear noticing. "Free men do not all want the same freedom. Free women less so. Let them speak." In the end it was neither clean nor pretty. It took all day and most of the next and two that followed. It took a near fight that saw the Hound step between two lords with his old look of a man ready to ruin a party. It took Davos making jokes he didn't believe and seeing men believe them anyway, because they wanted to be told they were reasonable. It took Sansa arguing like a woman at a market and winning because she knew the price of everything on the table. It took Jon saying very little and stepping back from hands that wanted to push him forward. It took Daenerys not burning, which turned out to be a kind of suffering that made her sway on her feet that night and almost not get up the next morning. When smoke thinned and the air remembered that not all noise is war, Daenerys stood in the dragon pit and the realm stood with her, except the piece that did not and had her blessing not to. "I will be queen," she said. "Not the last. Not the first to be chosen, but the first to be chosen this way. I will not keep the North if it does not wish to be kept." Sansa stepped forward. "The North will be an ally," she said. "A friend if you are a friend. A different house on the same street. Then come and go as you like, Daenerys said, and the smallest possible smile bent one corner of her mouth. Grey Worm asked leave to take men to Noth. Missandei's eyes shone. He said there was a kind of peace that needed guarding just as much as cities needed guarding, and no one had a law against that. Gendry went to his seat with a promise not to drink the cellars dry in his first year, and a hammer. He could still find a way to lift when the day was too long. Davos refused any titles that needed papers and busied himself in the unglamorous business of making ports trustworthy and ships less prone to drowning their crews. Varys looked east for the first time in years and smiled at the thought of cities that loved no thrones at all. Tyrion remained Hand because there was no one else who wanted to be Hand badly enough to be suspicious. He worked. He offended. He apologized. He put stones where walls had fallen and argued that stones did not heal anything if put alone. He wrote. He didn't drink as much as he thought he would. Some days he went up to a shattered room with a sky for a roof and looked at birds and imagined what a law might look like if it had wings. Jon escorted Sansa and Arya to the quay. Strode and stood with them past where it would have been wise to turn back. Come home when you can, Sansa said, with a sternness that was love wearing boots. When the snow goes and the first leaves come, or when the snow comes back, or in between. Arya leaned into him and then stepped away before it could make them both hurt. There's West, she said. No, the kind that make the mouth feel like it is saying something true. The wind did not answer. It didn't need to. He felt, in the steadiness of his feet on roots that had outlived kings, that some truths do not ask to be believed. They only ask not to be hidden. And for the first time in a long season of winters, that was enough. The first crack of stone had sounded like thunder, and after it the whole keep learned how to fall. Sandor Clegane found the thing that had once been his brother waiting on a half-collapsed landing where light lanced in through a sheared wall and turned motes of dust into a blizzard. Gregor's armor was matte black and pocked as if it had been chewed by acid, and inside it his shape moved like a memory refusing to be kind. Qyburn's leash had snapped when the blade slipped under his shoulder, and with the leash gone the beast did not look for a hand to tell it yes. It only looked for a thing to break. You always were ugly, the hound said. His sword was out. It felt like a small thing in his hand. He had never loved steel. He loved the moment before it met an enemy, the small, honest space in which a man's life was only his again. Gregor did not answer. He stepped forward and the stair complained under the weight of a man and his wrongness. Below them, the corridors were full of the sound a city makes when it remembers how to die. Come on then, Sandor growled and went. Blade scraped. The mountain's lazy swing smashing stone out of stone. The hound's shorter stroke turning aside what could be turned and meeting what could not with a grunt and a step that stole the force from the blow. Fire danced in Sandor's head as it always did when the air was hot with ruin. He pushed it away. Came back. He pushed again. The thing with Gregor's skull made a sound like a grindstone. They went down 3 steps and back up 4 and then across a landing where a tapestry had fallen and made the ground treacherous with velvet. Dust stuck to sweat and turned it to paste. Sandor's breath cut in and out like a saw. He did not count. He did not measure. He worked. It came as it had to. A hand like iron closing around his throat. A lift as if he weighed no more than a sack of oats. A tipsy tilt toward a gap where the wall had forgotten to be. The Red Keep was full of sky. A dragon howled. The world tilted again. Not today, Sandor croaked and drove his dagger up under the plates in the armpit, where even monsters have something soft once. The blade went sheer, found a path and sank half its length. The mountain did not flinch. He squeezed. Sandor saw spots, small black coins buying up light. A memory rose very cleanly, as they sometimes do when a man has nearly sold his last breath. A boy held in fire, the smell of hair, the slick pain, a brother's laugh that was not laughter but an appetite. Sandor's lips peeled back. He spat blood into the dark grill where Gregor's eyes should have been, and with his free hand he reached. D for the shattered torch wedged in a crack where stone had burst. His fingers closed around pitch and splinter. It crumbled and cut his palm. He didn't care. He shoved it into the coals spilling from a toppled brazier where the wind licked and the orange deepened. The wood took. "Look at it," he whispered, and shoved the flame into the gap he had made in his brother's armor. Gregor moved then. He moved in a way that said whatever was inside the armor remembered that fire was older than hunger. Sandor hammered the torch in and in until his fingers burned and his nails peeled and the smell became a thing with teeth. Gregor's hand opened by a finger's width. Sandor fell and caught the edge of stone on his ribs. For a moment he hung, the world boiling around him in light and dust, and then he was on his knees and his sword was in his hand again and he was laughing or crying, he couldn't tell. He saw flames blooming under black steel. He saw the thing that had been his brother begin, finally, to hate. "Come on," he said raggedly, rising, and gave him his chest. The mountain came like a wall, deciding it had never liked standing upright. They met in the middle. Sandor's blade kissed a seam, slipped, bit. Gregor's hands found his shoulders. Heat crawled over both of them. The floor lost interest in being a floor and scooted a foot sideways. They went together, a tangle of metal and meat, into the hole where the keep opened its eye. Sandor had time to think of Arya, of a girl who had kept her feet when men twice her weight had slipped. He had time to think of a chicken he never ate. He had time to think of nothing else at all. And then the air tore at him and fire roared up to meet them. Not a wall but a mouth. He hit with his brother wrapped around him like a nightmare he had finally dragged into the day. For a moment the pain broke into petals and became almost soft. "Bugger you," he said to the dark that loomed like sleep, and this time sleep did not argue. In the days after the bells, King's Landing learned the slow arithmetic of living. Tyrion woke with a taste of dust and ink in his mouth and went to sleep with the same taste. He stood in a street where shattered tiles lay like bones and told a woman with a broken tooth where the nearest cistern had not been poisoned by the rubble. He stood in a court where a brickmaker argued with a baker over whose oven could be parted from whose wall and ruled that the wall belonged to whoever had sparrows to stack it back first. He sent a letter to Old Town that contained nothing but apologies and a list of materials the city needed urgently, in an order that would not drive the Archmasters mad. He sent a second letter to the Iron Bank and did not apologize. Davos haunted the harbors and shouted at men kindly. The fireships had left their own weather. Char ash drifting in, sticking to ropes, turning men's hands black to the elbow. He supervised the pulling free of the scorpion carcasses. Their warped iron dragged like beached sea beasts into a pile that would be melted down to nails. He found a boy pinching copper shavings into a pocket and rapped him, not hard, on the back of the head. "You want to be rich?" he asked. The boy stared. "Learn to swim. Rich men drown the same as the rest if they can't swim." Missandei translated rage into requests and requests into work. Words stood up straighter in her mouth than they did in anyone else's, and people who were not used to being heard found themselves being answered. She made a list of midwives and a list of those who wanted to learn. She made a list of masons who would teach boys and girls both how to lay a line straight and a stone square, and a list of broken roofs and broken hands, and put the first list with the second until the city began, in 100 tiny ways, to remember a shape. Varys listened. He listened in stew shops and under arches and from the backs of wagons and on the eaves of buildings where cats rubbed his ankles and accepted his thanks with a disdain that pleased him. His little birds were older now, some of them, and some of them were new. He paid for whispers with bread and with safety and with the assurance that if a word reached the wrong ear, he would be the one to stand in the doorway. He brought Daenerys petitions and urged patience, and when patience frayed he spoke to Tyrion in the deep hours about how power is a river, and men drown themselves by pretending it is a lake. Daenerys learned to listen to hammers. The city made them under her, banging at plates and pots and ribs of roof beams and coins and a dozen ways to say, "We are still here." Drogon curled on the hill where the Red Keep's pride had been. He did not like the city's smell. So many hot, sharp notes, so little wind. He watched with an eye that had decided, for now, to be placid, and when children crept up as far as the heat would let them and left offerings of burnt fish and broken dolls, he lowered his head and breathed once, making hair and shouts stand up. "Name a commander," Tyrion said, for the third time in a week. Someone the city will fear just enough and respect more. Not a lion, Daenerys answered. Not a sellsword whose loyalty is measured in spoons of gold. A woman, Missandei suggested. That might be a thing they remember for good later. They found a woman named Rayla Waters who had been the watch sergeant of Flea Bottom and had kept order with a firm hand and a fixed glance and a knack for being where harm had thought to be private. She listened to Daenerys, and she looked at Tyrion the way a cat looks at a complicated ladder. I'll take the cloaks, she said. If the men keep their wages and their fingers and know who they answer to, and if anyone touches the girls in Lantern Alley, I get his ears. Take both, Daenerys said. Rayla bowed, and when she straightened, her mouth had not turned into a smile, but some of the harshness in her eyes had gone loose. The gold cloaks on. To her would be duller a long time before they were gold again. She took them anyway and made their lines run straight. She sent them to pump water and dig privies and haul stone and carry bread before she gave any of them a spear. The city learned to look for the strip of blue she tied around her men's sleeves. It was a clean color, and people wanted more of it in their day. The small council that was not so small met in a long chamber open to the elements because half its roof was just sky. Davos sat reluctantly in a chair that someone had polished for the first time since a king with lion's hair had lounged there. He glared at the shine until it dulled. Varys arranged a small mountain of papers and then moved them around so their peaks and valleys matched his mood. Tyrion rubbed his temples. Missandei took notes that made men later think they'd said exactly what they meant to. Daenerys listened to them all and surprised herself by how often she said no. The Iron Bank will have its due, Varys said. They are reasonable men who shout very quietly, which is always unnerving. We pay, Tyrion said. But slowly. We send them what we can without squeezing the small folk like old fruit. We ask them to invest, not just collect. Rebuild the granaries with their coin. Mortgage the future against years when a future cannot be mortgaged. They will want hostages by another name, Varys murmured. Send them trade, Davos said. We've lost enough hostages. They will ask for security from the Reach, Tyrion mused. Which reminds me that the Reach has no clear lord now. Highgarden can choose from itself, Daenerys said. It has Hightowers who think themselves kings of lanterns and Redwynes who think wine a crown. The Hightowers will claim Old Town is theirs, Varys said mildly. The Archmesters will object to being claimed. The Redwynes will sell whoever wins a very fine cask to celebrate. Let them, she said. If they bring me grain and ships and order in the roads and keep their swords pointed at the bandits. I care little which lord polishes which chair. They will bend the knee or they will not. It is the same so long as their hands lift with mine. Tyrion smiled despite himself. Some day, your grace, you will say a sentence the way a maester makes tea. What does that mean? All heat and patience, he said. And enough bitterness to be wise. Old Town sent an envoy whose chain shone in the sun, and who pretended very nicely not to watch a dragon drowse on a hill. He brought a list of names and a longer list of warnings. Daenerys sent him away with a smaller list, and with the understanding that she would not set the citadel on fire simply for having been wrong before. From Dorne came a letter signed with a sun and spear that imported more pride than ink. The prince or princess. The parchment had a tilt to its script that might have been either. Wrote that Dorne did not bend to winters or to queens, but it did understand enemies and roads and trade, and therefore would be pleased to send oranges and spears in exchange for respect. Daenerys sent spears to the border with the Stormlands and oranges to her table, and announced that anyone who broke the peace in the Prince's Pass would answer to her dragon's opinion. Yara Greyjoy arrived with the smell of salt in her hair and grief in her throat. She brought 30 ships and the memory of brothers. She went to the hill and stood with Daenerys where the wind lifted the queen's pale hair and made it into a flag. I told my men we would not reave, Yara said, as if making a confession. They nodded as if they liked me and then left in the night to take a fishing village in the arbor and were cut to ribbon by farmers with hooks. We are not good at being told no. Then I won't tell you no, Daenerys answered. I will tell you yes to other things. Bring fish and send grain. Carry messages where roads are slow. Take coin to the islands for your women to hold and spend. Bring me a boy who thinks men like to be poor and ask him if he likes to be drowned. Yara's smile was a salt wind across a scar. You talk like an old man from the Iron Islands, she said. You're learning. Teach me, Daenerys said. Teach me how to talk to people I cannot fly over without making enemies of all the gulls. I'll teach you this, Yara said. We want the same as the North. We want to be left alone to be ourselves. Wish it when you can. When you cannot, do not lie about it. They clasped arms. It was the sort of pact men would write down later as if they had made it, and shrug when women remembered differently. North of the neck, the world became itself again. Spring was not a promise. It was work. Sansa rose before the kettles and met with a circle of faces that were maps of old loyalties and newer hungers. Lord Serwyn, with a cough that was a warning. Alice Karstark, her hair aflame and her manner careful as a new mother's. Jon Royce with a voice of iron left out in snow. The Manderleys sent a cousin with cheeks like ship sails and a good humor that did not mean he would be kind to liars. The Umbers sent no one because there was no one to send. The Glovers sent an apology that was not one. Bear Island sent Alysanne Mormont, who had a voice like a forge and eyes that liked the hard parts of problems best. Food, Sansa said, because queens who started with banners ended with hunger. We have enough barley to see to Michaelmas if we ration and supplement with fish. The new gift will seed well if we mend the plowshare. The new gift needs men who like getting cold, Alysanne noted. We have some, fewer than we had. Let the Dothraki take it, someone muttered, and earned 3 looks that made him reevaluate the use of his mouth. They would not stay, Sansa said. We ask help for the hedges and the drains and the ditches. Not for the hearths. The hearths are ours. The hearths know our names. She named Brienne her Lord Commander in a simple thing in the yard, with the snow soft underfoot and the sky deciding whether to mean blue or gray. Brienne knelt in her white cloak and rose with the same look she had had when she knelt, which was a relief. Oaths are thinner than people pretend. It helps when they are said by someone who carries them as if they weigh nothing and everything at once. Your Grace, Brienne said, her hand on the hilt of Oathkeeper. I am yours and the North's. And, she added, and a small smile moved the corners of her mouth. I am, as ever, Lady Sansa's friend. Never forget which is the stronger bond, Sansa murmured, dry, and they both understood exactly what she meant. They opened a school in the old granary house on the east side of the keep. A maester from White Harbor with a limp that was a souvenir from a length of pike rearranged a long table and chalked letters on slate. Children came as if called to warmth on a cold day, and so did men whose hands had only ever known fur and haft, and girls who had watched their mothers keep numbers in their heads as if they were embers and now wanted a different kind of fire. Arya, passing through on her way west, sat for an hour with her chin on her fist and learned nothing she did not know, and everything she had not heard spoken aloud in that room. Howesome sounds, the way a letter leaves a mouth and lands on a board. She left a small purse of coin and did not say what it was for. Sansa knew. Sansa always knew. Jon came and went between the heart tree and the high table, between a line of men measuring the new gift with eyes that did not trust flat land and the cold stone of Castle Black. The wall was still a wall, though a bite had been taken from it. Snow collected in the scar. Ravens perched there and looked at men as if they were peculiar birds that had forgotten how to fly. Men will come, Tormund said. His beard hung here and there with beads that small hands had plaited in. We have women with bellies. We have boys and girls who can set snares and ignore each other when it is useful. We have old men who tell long stories and are not cold while they do it. We can run the woods without anybody explaining what a tree is. You can settle freely, Jon said. South of the wall to the first line of the gift. Keep to the watch roads. Leave the few houses we have standing. Take the hills. Take the deer. Leave the sheep. When the snows come early, come to Castle Black. We'll keep grain for you. You give a lot for a Stark, Tormund teased. I am half a Stark, Jon answered. Effective halves are better than proud wholes. Tormund ignored the quip to thump him on the back. You'll come north when your sister makes you count flour too many nights in a row." "I might," Jon said, and thought of open ground. He thought of air that was clean because nothing had had the chance to foul it yet, and of Ghost's white shape gliding between black trees. The watch persisted. It changed as men who love old things think they cannot. It took in women who had lost everything but their own stubbornness. It took in boys whose fathers had not been kind and had given them nowhere else to be. It took in men who had decided that after one war and another, only straight rules and straight walls could be trusted. The vows shifted their weight but not their meaning. The wall kept the wind off of them, and they kept the wild from unraveling too fast. They built a small house south of the gate where children could decide whether the winter they were born with was the winter they wanted to carry. Sam returned to Winterfell with Gilly and the boy and a satchel full of paper that smelled like mice and wisdom. He bowed to Sansa and forgot halfway down how one bows, and so he stood up with red ears. "I brought books," he blurted, "and a suggestion that I might be allowed to write them here as well. Only some," he added in a rush, as if anyone would be offended by more books. "Just the honest parts." "Are there dishonest parts?" Arya asked, amused. "There are shaped parts," Sam said. "Parts that fit better if you press on them. Parts that—" "Oh, I'm not explaining it very well." "You are," Sansa said warmly. "You are explaining it the way anyone who loves a thing explains it." Gilly found the kitchens with the speed of a woman who knows how men survive. She set the boy down and he went like a hummingbird into corners. The cook looked at him and sighed and then looked at Gilly and her eyes softened. Children's softened eyes. It was one of their powers. Sam installed himself in a corner of the old maester's tower and brought in more candles than were decent and wrote by them until his hand cramped. He wrote beautifully and badly, both at once. The words stumbled sometimes and then lifted with a grace that made Sansa pause at the door and look at the pile of pages as if it were a baby. He wrote about the long night and about a girl with a knife who ran as if she had been born to run, and a queen who did not burn a city, and a man who had been living under a name not his. He left some names out because he understood that truth and kindness have been cousins longer than most houses. Melisandre walked away from the fires after the battle and found a place where the snow melted in a circle because the earth remembered it had a heart. She took off the charms she had worn like a skin and set them carefully on a stone. She looked up. The sky was blue, but far in it she saw a dark thread that meant winter would come again, as it always does. "I have been a knife and a mistaken map and a candle in the wrong window," she said softly. "But I have been a candle." She lay down on the earth, and the earth took her, not as payment but as something owed and gladly given. In the morning crows found a ring in the frost where a woman had been and did not peck at it. Some sparks cannot be eaten. In King's Landing the Red Keep was a skeleton, and men built scaffolds along its ribs and climbed, with the wariness of mice in a sleeping cat's mouth. Daenerys walked through halls where once kings had snarled and smiled and steadied herself on the fact that now any child could walk there, too, if she did not forget how to say no. She held court every 5th day in a courtyard that had no roof, where the light could find the faces that spoke to her. She heard of a butcher who had saved a baker's children from a fire and then raised the price of meat and was surprised to learn men called him a hero. She heard of a septon who refused to reopen his sept because he thought the city was wicked, and she sent him to clean latrines for a week. When he came back, he smiled as if he had found a new god. "Let them see you on Dragonback," Tyrion urged once. "Just enough." "Enough is not a number," she answered, but she mounted Drogon and wheeled low over the city anyway. And for days after, people stood at doorways and told each other they had felt the wind of her passing and that it had smelled like sea salt and warm stone. Children drew dragons in ash on the street, and for the first time in memory the gold cloaks did not chase them away. An envoy waited one morning from the Riverlands with a face like a weathered map. Edmure Tully had been many things: prisoner, fool, lord, father, and now he was something else again. A man who knew the value of a quiet river. He bowed to Daenerys with a dignity that had learned to duck and had decided it would no longer. "The Riverlands will have peace," he said. "We will accept a garrison if you send us men who know how to swim." "I have a man," Davos said. 2, maybe. They laughed, and afterwards it was easier to talk of grain barges and bridge tolls and how to coax a harvest from fields that had seen more iron than rain. Varys brought a whisper like a thorn on a breeze. There are men in the disputed lands, he said, placing a small, precise map upon the table, who have decided the Golden Company need not exist for gold to be wanted. They style themselves captains and kings and speak of a mummer's throne. We won't go east, Daenerys said. Not now. Not for them. No, Varys agreed. But we can guide trade away from their harbors and toward places that remember how to keep contracts. We can make empty bellies where they expect feasts. Even sellswords do not fight long for the pleasure of it. Except the ones who do, Tyrion muttered, but he nodded. We make it unprofitable to pretend a banner is a law. Missandei leaned over the map. We also write letters, she said. To Tyrosh and to Myr and to Volantis. We offer dock fees that make honest profit shine brighter than stolen gold. We remember that men like their greed tidy. Daenerys smiled at her. And if it does not work, we remember I have a dragon. Behind all of it was a city learning how to trust its mornings. Markets reopened and stumbled and stepped. Houses breathed people again. In Lantern Alley, Rayla Waters caught a man with a blade and did not cut off his ears, because the girl he had grabbed had taken them first with her own knife. Rayla promoted the girl to the watch and told her to choose men who would not flinch at being told a woman could give orders. The girl did and did not seem to think the world would stop turning because of it. Grey Worm came to the Queen with 2 requests. The first was to carry Unsullied down the narrow sea to Noth. When he spoke of it, his voice lost its edge and gained something else that Sam, listening, later called a sound like prayer. The butterflies, Sam reminded gently. There are fevers there. Men from elsewhere sicken and die. We will build on the islands off the coast, Missandei said. On the rocks the Nothi do not use. We will trade for their fruit and fish and bring stone and water in jars and wait 3 months before we set foot on the main island. We will ask the healers to come to us. We will not push where we do not belong. Daenerys, hearing this, did something she had discovered gave her pleasure. She did not order. She offered. Take a maester, she said. 2. Choose ones who know the difference between learning and conquering. And take ships with clean decks, and captains who do not count coin more fiercely than men. And take my blessing. She stood and placed a hand on Grey Worm's shoulder, and if he felt the weight or the warmth, he did not show it. But he bowed his head the way a man bows when something inside him says yes. The second request came quieter. I will leave some, he said. Unsullied who do not want water that smells like flowers. They will guard your city until you tell them to return. They will not have families. He hesitated, a strange thing for him. They will have streets they know. Give them houses, Daenerys said. Give them gardens. They can watch walls better if they know which wall they would be sorry to see smashed. He looked at her. For a moment the unsmiling face softened, and the boy he had been peered up out of the man and nodded. Yara sailed west with a belly of salted fish and east with barrels of grain and looked at the sea as if it were a man she might marry. Dangerous, beautiful, wavering, and sometimes quite stupid. She went to Pike and told her people that the old way had not vanished. It had only grown hands that could count. Some howled. Some listened. None of them forgot the day a dragon flew over their rocks and regarded them as if trying to decide whether they were worth the taste. Yara took that, too, and made a story of it that kept young men from trying things their grandfathers would have called glory and their grandmothers would have called getting drowned. Arya stood at the edge of the world and chose a ship that looked like it had forgiven being small. Its captain had a scar across his cheek that told a tale no one needed to hear. She shook his hand and did not tell him her name. He did not ask. Men who live in the parts of the map that are guessed rather than dr. On have learned that names are often only bait. The first days west were wind and trust and the odd taste of change on the tongue. The water turned a blue that seemed to have learned a new word. Gulls followed and then gave up as if insulted by the ship's insistence on straight lines. Arya leaned at the prow and watched until the shapes she knew grew small and then disappeared. Beyond, there were islands that the charts called by 3 names at once and shores where the air smelled of spices that made her eyes sting. She went ashore where children ran in sunlight and dogs with hair like curled rope snapped at fish heads. She learned a word for bread that had no wheat in it and a word for a knife that meant also a kiss. She gave the captain coin to wait for 3 days and then 2 more and told him if she didn't appear, he would be the man who went home with a better story than she did. He laughed and did not say he had always wanted a better story. There was a night when the sky turned green at the edges and the sea rose as if irritated. The ship creaked, a long, complaining sound, and then settled. Arya slept with her hand on the blade Jon had put in her palm years ago, and dreamed she was running through Winterfell's halls again, and each corner turned into a street in a city she had never seen and then into a meadow under stars so crowded she felt she could drink them. In the morning, a pod of dolphins gambled alongside the bow as if asking whether anyone wanted to trade homes. Arya grinned at them and shook her head. "Not yet," she said. When land finally appeared, it did so shyly, a low smudge that pretended not to be what it was, and then privileges insisted upon themselves. The shore was a long, curving lip of sand, and behind it rose hills that wore forests like fur. A bird with feathers the color of melted gold flitted in and out of the trees, and a monkey sat on a boulder and made a face at the sailors that said he had seen better crews. The captain turned and looked at her as if to say, "This is not in any book I know." Arya shrugged and said without words that most good things aren't. They went ashore with caution. Arya took only 2 men and left her face on the ship. She moved the way she always had, as if the ground itself had made a path for her. The people they found were like people everywhere. Tired, curious, kind to children, suspicious of strangers, able to count fish and wounds and tell the difference between a game and a threat. They had words that did not have edges, and laughed when Arya tried to copy them and sounded like a cat stepping in paint. She laughed too. She traded a small mirror for a small fruit that tasted like if sunlight were a liquid. She did not write the place on any map because some places do not want to be maps yet. They want to be themselves. When she left, a little girl ran along the beach and then stopped, and Arya turned and waved at her, and the child waved back and then threw a handful of shells in the air as if scattering coin to luck. Natha's butterflies lifted and fell with the light like prayer flags. Grey Worm stood on a rock where a woman had once sung to him and closed his eyes to hear a voice he knew he would not hear the same way again. The men he brought built platforms over the shallows and roofed them with palm and tile. They brought jars of clean water and set them in lines like soldiers. They chose with great care the day they stepped onto the island itself, and some wore charms Missandei gently did not suggest, and some did not, but none of them made a mockery of the charms the Nathi wore. The fever came to 3 men. 1 died. 2 lived and would be weak a long time. They learned to sleep under nets and to watch butterflies as if they were weather. They learned from men with smooth shoulders and women with slow smiles how to move through a grove without disturbing what loved the grove more than men could. They built a wall that a child could dismantle and called it a wall anyway, because words are habits. Missandei walked with her hand held out to the air, and the air took it. She spoke long with women who had been slaves and were not now. She spoke to boys who thought the world was a place where men come and go and sometimes leave kindness and sometimes leave knives. She spoke to men who were tired of knives. She thought of a city with a broken roof and of a queen who tried not to lie to herself, and she thought of how strange it is that a person can be homesick for 2 places at once. She wrote a letter and sent it with a ship that had room for such fragile weight. Daenerys read it on a morning when the court had been all quarrels and requests and the smell of onions, and her laughter when it came was a clean sound. She looked up and saw Tyrion watching her. "She says," Daenerys murmured, "that the butterflies do not care who is queen." "Few butterflies do," Tyrion said, and took the letter with careful hands when she offered it. Time made itself busy. It has a talent for that. The realm settled into a new shape the way a river settles after a flood. Slowly, with eddies that remember being deeper. The North did not bow and was not asked to. Sansa heard petitions under a carved arch where once her mother had set her hand on a boy's head and tried to guide him toward sense. In their turns, Alice Karstark came to her with a proposal for breeding sturdier ponies and a gentler way of breaking them. Alysanne Mormont came with a complaint that men from the Rills were taking more than their share at the Salmon Bend. Wyman Manderly's cousin came with a recipe that would stretch barley with something called puffweed, and after some deliberation Sansa decided that bread should taste like bread even in hard years, and made it a rule that pies were where a cook had leave to be clever. Brienne rode the borders and was seen, which was most of her job. She broke 2 bandit bands and turned a third into ditch diggers for a month B. 'Cause the ditches needed digging and hanging men do less useful work. Podrick, growing into his own face the way young leaves grow into their summer, followed with an expression that suggested he still did not believe he had the right to hold a sword in such company, and yet kept holding it anyway. He sang sometimes when the road was long, and the old women who watched them from doorways smiled and went to look at the chest where they kept things too precious for every day. Once, on the eastern road near the Twins, Brienne met a man who had only one hand and more regret than would fit in his chest. He sat his horse as if he had known her, once. She had known him, once. They looked at each other a long time, and Podrick, bless him, pretended to need to water his horse. "I didn't go," Jaime said finally. "I meant to. I went as far as the Trident, and then something in me remembered a different road." "You always were poor at choosing roads," Brienne said. "It was not unkind." "I heard," he said, "that she died without anyone saying her name. I do not know if that is a cruelty or a mercy." "Both," Brienne said. "Many things are." He looked thinness itself, a man who had spent whatever fat life had graced him with buying days in which to be sorry. "Tell me you are well," he said. "I am well," she said, and found it was not a lie. "Come north. You will be safe." He smiled a strange smile. "I don't think I will be safe anywhere that knows me," he said. "Which means the safest place is somewhere no one does." "Then go," she said, and he went. He did not look back. He did not need to. Some meetings are as complete as books. They do not require sequels. At court, Tyrion worried coins into good behavior and then restive again. He argued with Bronn and won and lost in equal measure, and discovered he did not mind when he lost if the losing built roads. Bronn was better at counting than men like to admit. He rolled his eyes when someone suggested titles and then took one because it made other men stop pushing for the emptier ones. He bought a house with a pear tree and sat under it on hot afternoons with a cup of wine and an expression that said he had forgiven his younger self every bad decision because they had led him to a tree. The faith tried very hard to be important, and sometimes was. A new High Septon, one who had been a middling one for so long no one remembered a time when he had not been middling, wrote to Daenerys with compliments and advisories. She thanked him and used the church kitchens to feed folk in a hard week when the grain from Rose Road was late. She gave him nothing else to complain of. He chose to call that victory. The Iron Bank came again and went away again with numbers it could live with, and a promise that roads would be made that would make money move faster, which pleased them almost as much as coin itself. Tycho Nestoris' smile was the small, careful thing it always had been. But when he bowed, there was something in the angle of it that suggested a surprise he had not disliked. Jon returned to King's Landing once, months after the bells, when the wheat in the fields around the city stood up straight and staggered under its own wealth. He came with a small retinue and no banner raised. His presence made one anyway. People who had never seen a Stark knew one when their bones told them one had walked by. He went up to the hill where the Red Keep had discovered humility and found Daenerys looking out over a city that, for the first time in its long, stubborn life, did not dream of burning. "You look better," he said quietly. "I sleep," she said, surprised to hear it. "Sometimes I sleep." He nodded at the city. "They like you better. They like the bread," she said, "and the water, and the way the watch stays their hand unless there's cause." She narrowed her eyes at him. "One of my captains says your sister has a better head for roads than I do." "She does," Jon said. "She has a better head than most. I plan to lean on it." "You already do?" Daenerys said, and they smiled together, not because anything was simple, but because the breath in their lungs was sweet. He told her of the school and of Sam's foolish books and of a woman named Asha at Long Lake who had invented a way of catching fish with 2 nets at once and wanted to teach it to others if they promised to share their catch with those who could not stand in the cold as long as she could. He told her of Arya, and here his voice faltered a little, and Daenerys looked out at the sea with him, who had written from a place with fruits too sweet for words, and had enclosed one seed in a small paper twist and told Sansa to plant it and see whether the North wanted to argue. He told her of Ghost and how sometimes the wolf returned with burrs in his fur, as if he had been doing secret business with bushes that held grudges. "I will come north," she said suddenly. "Not to be greeted, to be reminded. The North knows how to make a person remember who they are." "Come," Jon said. "Bring only those who like the cold." She came before the leaves turned, and for a week Winterfell was full of a sound like a question that made men's hands pause halfway to their hats and then drop again. Drogon took the courtyard as if testing whether his weight would break it and, finding it would not, lay down and pretended to be a hill. Children's laughter in the North is rare and sweet. For days they brought him the chopped ends of carrots and the bread heels and the bits of meat their mothers cut off and hid in pockets. He took them with solemn grace. Ghost sat at a distance and pretended he did not care. Then he trotted forward and sat beside Drogon, and the two of them breathed together, and a little boy who had never seen anything larger than an oxen began to understand what the words big and safe meant when they stood next to each other. Sansa received Daenerys in the hall where banners hung with less arrogance than they at once done. They circled each other in conversation like two women making a dance up as they went, cautious and then less, measuring and then remembering they had both weighed too many men to bother with scales. "Your people are well," Daenerys said. "They eat when I do," Sansa answered. "They sleep when I can. We are not so different." "You would make a good queen in any place," Daenerys said, and it was not flattery. "I am a good queen here," Sansa said, and it was not pride. They walked the godswood together and did not speak most of the time. The heart tree watched them the way a very old thing watches a new one and decided, perhaps, to approve. Bran sat where he always did, not exactly in this world and not exactly anywhere else either, and when Daenerys stopped before him, he looked up with eyes that had widened to fit what they had seen. "You did not burn it," he said. "No," she answered. "I wanted to. I did not." "Wanting isn't sin," Bran murmured. "Forgetting that you wanted is." She looked at him a long time. "You talk like a man who has forgotten many things." "I remember more," he said simply. "That is the cost." Before she left, she stood with Jon under a sky so clear the moon seemed small in it, as if embarrassed. He reached for her hand and she let him. They stood that way a long time. "We could have made a different world," she said. "We did," he said, "when we didn't burn it." "I don't mean the world," she said, and turned her face so he could see the tired smile and the light behind it. "I mean the small world. You and I. We made this one," he said. "That may be the better world. Smaller things are often built better." She leaned in then and kissed him once, soft as snow falling on moss. It was not a hunger. It was a blessing and a goodbye that were not goodbyes. "Keep them warm," she whispered. "Keep them fed," he answered. The realm learned seasons again. Carts creaked south heavy and returned north heavy. Grain one way, wool the other, and laughter both ways, which is the surest sign of peace a road can hear. The Dothraki who stayed learned that a horse in the Reach is a different animal than a horse in the sea of grass, but that both creatures answer to hands that are patient and a knee that is kind. Some of them returned east with gold and a story of a queen who asked them not to ride where houses could catch fire. Some stayed and became a legend that someday men would call ordinary. In a year when the barley came up thick and the vineyards sent up a smell that made men drunk before they drank, a ship docked at White Harbor with a woman on it whose hair had been cut short by a man with a knife who did not know hair the way women do. Arya stepped onto the dock and looked around as if measuring whether the world had remembered to wait for her. It had. She went to Winter and told Sansa a story of a place where birds sing in a key the North would not recognize and the water tastes like a new kind of metal and men do not fear strangers because they have never been told to. She gave the seed she had sent to be planted a last look. Sansa had found a place for it near the old walls where the sun could hold it for hours and the wind could not, and laughed when she saw that the plant had made itself comfortable, with thick, glossy leaves that looked absurd under a sky that still sometimes threw white in April. "It looks wrong," Sansa said. "It looks different," Arya corrected. "That's not the same thing." Tyrion wrote down the laws they had made and the laws they had unmade and discovered that writing things down made them heavier somehow, in a good way. He found he could drink a glass of wine at the end of a day and stop there. He found he dreamed less of his father's mouth and more of his brother's hands pouring him a cup he did not ask for but wanted. He stood often in the sky palace that used to be a throne room and spoke to birds because birds are excellent liars and excellent confessors and therefore ideal listeners. "We have not ruined it," he would tell them sometimes. "We have only bruised it in places it can heal." Varys died as he had lived, gently, and after making a difference no man would know he had made. He fell ill in autumn and faded in a bed with clean sheets and Missandei holding his hand because she had a talent for being exactly where a hand was needed. Before the fever took words, he said to Tyrion, "I have always thought justice is a bird with a broken wing, good, but unlikely to fly far. Today I think perhaps we gave it a tree from which to sing." Tyrion wept after, quietly, because love surprises a man at the oddest times. He held the hand of a friend and thought of a certain spider walking a certain web and wondered if, when he found his way to whatever lay after the last secret, he would be pleased by how the corners had held. Missandei stayed in King's Landing for a long time after Grey Worm left and then left herself, a season later, when she realized she had been writing the same words in different orders for months, and that the ocean was saying her name. She went to Noth not because a man waited there but because a self did, one that had not been allowed to be big enough before. She and Grey Worm did not marry. They did not need to. They replaced vows with habits, which is how the best vows live anyway, and when he returned from patrols with leaves in his hair and salt on his skin, he would sit and listen to her talk of a butterfly's path, and when she returned from a meeting where she had refused to sign away a watercourse, she would stand behind him and set her hands on his shoulders, and they would watch, together, the way the light decided to go. Years gathered, shy at first, then with more confidence. Children came and changed the way the air sounded in rooms. Ghost grew old and did not stop being himself. Drogon hunted less often and with more deliberation. If there were nights when the queen woke with a breath cog, and forgot, for a heartbeat, whether the bells had rung, she did not say. She rose and walked the halls and sometimes went to the shattered place where a chair had been and stood looking at the sky until the sun threatened to be rude and come up without asking. In the north, when the first true snow of a new winter fell, clean, quiet, with a sense of satisfaction, Jon stood in the Godswood again. He did not speak. He did not need to. The bark was cold under his palm. His breath plumed and vanished. Somewhere a fox's neat prints crossed a rabbit's and then did not anymore. Somewhere a girl leaned over a table with a map of a place no one had named yet and said, "Here." Somewhere a queen paused over a piece of bread she had paid herself to bake and thought that this was as sweet as the food she had eaten as a child. Somewhere an old man in Old Town filed a small complaint about a law that said children could choose to learn letters even if their fathers disapproved. And somewhere a young man answered the complaint with words so polite they were a silent laugh. Jon put his forehead to the heart tree and closed his eyes. He saw his father's face, both of them, the one by blood and the one by deed, and he did not choose between them because he did not need to. He felt the weight of names loosen again to become what they had always been, useful and heavy, and not required to be worn in sleep. He thought of a promise that had not choked him, and of a truth that had not unmade what it meant to be himself. A wind slid through the leaves and did not answer in words. It didn't need to. It hummed in the old wood in a note that meant, "This too is a season. Hold it, and when it passes, hold the next." Winterfell breathed. King's Landing did. Noth did, and Pike, and the Vale's high stones, and the soft curves of Dorne, and the reach of the Reach. They did not breathe together, not always. Their chests rose and fell at their own paces. But when one forgot, the other remembered, and when one ran too fast, the other slowed. Bells rang when they should, and sometimes men forgot to listen, as men do. But not all men forgot. Not all women. Enough remembered to make a difference. And in a world where differences had so often been measured in blood, this was a startling, beautiful thing. That a truth told in a cold hall before a heart tree had begun not a fire, but a thaw.